Hello again everybody, so today I'm back and today I'm going to be doing another one of my list videos. So I've done a few of these over the past few months and they've always been quite popular. It's just basically lists of things I find particularly interesting in books, particular styles that stand out for me. And today I'm going to be listing my top 5 favourite books with interesting narrative styles. So narrative style is something that really hooks me into a book, something that's a bit unique. That will normally guarantee I pick it up, whereas if it wasn't such an interesting narrative style, I might not normally touch it. And today I'm going to be telling you about my top 5 favourite books with interesting narrative styles and what they do to really stand out. The first book on the list for today then is World War Z by Max Brooks. So this is really interesting as a piece of zombie fiction. If you watch the film, that is completely different and pretty awful in comparison to the book. The book is basically made up of loads of interviews and reports and little flashbacks from 50, 60 different people. Basically the whole concept of the book is a report that's been formulated about the zombie outbreak, how it was combated and the rebuilding of the world since. And it's the format of a report presented to a governing body, and it's all interviews and little anecdotes that tell that story. And it's such a fascinating way of doing it. You really get to see the whole worldwide implications of any zombie outbreak. You get to really get to know quite a good range of different characters, and it deals with everything from victories against the zombies, defeats against the zombies, the medical side of it, the epidemiology of it, just everything is covered in a really interesting way. It's really unusual, and because all the narratives are by different people, you get a really ton of different styles to it. And I was getting a bit sick of zombie fiction before I read this. It was when The Walking Dead was getting big and that was taking over and there was a lot of zombie stuff. This really stood out from the pack as completely different to everything else, and it's definitely one worth a read, if only for the new interesting narrative style. Book number 2 is Dave Eggers. It's a really long title, it's like 15 words long, I won't bore you with it, but basically Dave Eggers' stuff's always really interesting in some way. So his last book, The Circle, was really interesting because it was kind of told a story about social media and the impact of the internet on the world. This one is unusual because of the narrative style it uses. The plot's pretty standard. It's basically about a guy who kidnaps a series of people in a row, and it's his conversations with them and unveiling the story of why he's doing this, his psyche, those kinds of things. Interesting enough. But the most interesting thing it does is it only uses speech. There's no description, there's literally nothing, there's not even an explanation of who's saying the words, you kind of have to work it out, and it's just a really interesting way of doing it. It almost feels like a play reading it, but with even less description than a play, and it's really interesting. You get so caught up in it because it is so fast-paced, narrative and speech-driven. It's really enjoyable, completely different style to anything I've seen before, and continues Dave Eggers' reputation of being a bit unusual, but really interesting, and it's one well worth the read, if just to have a look at the style it's done. Now I do apologise in advance for the next book on the list, because I've talked about this on this channel a lot of times in the past few weeks. Illuminae. So if you've seen any of my past videos, my TBRs, etc., this is a sci-fi YA book. Basically, it's about 2 kids on a planet that gets attacked. They escape onto a spaceship, and on this spaceship there's a disease outbreak and the AI goes a bit crazy and they're caught up in this big whirlwind love story, and it's just a really weird mixture of things. Enjoyable enough, but not particularly stand out in terms of plot. What really makes it stand out is the style it's told in. So for example, there's a guy that transcribes the CCTV camera footage, and you get really interesting personality bits from him. There's bits of computer code used to tell the story, there's bits of text logs and official reports, and it's just a really interesting mixture of unusual things. Similar to World War Z, but it's got even more variety in what it does, and rather than painting such a wide picture like World War Z, this is a much more personal tale that's just told through these really unique ways of doing it. Really interesting. It's unusual, and it's literally the only reason I picked this book up. I wouldn't have picked it up had it not been for the unusual style, and the style is what really delivers with the book. The story's a bit but if you're after something a bit different that's YA, definitely give it a read just for the narrative style. So the next book on here is probably a bit unusual, you might not be expecting it, and actually it might take a little bit of time to work out what I mean with it. But it's Half Bad by Sally Green. So 80% of this book is just told in standard first person perspective, but the first 20% is told in second person, which is basically all using yous, putting the reader really into it. And second perspective is not something covered very often because A, it's quite hard to do right, and B, it is a bit jarring, But in this, because it is so unusual, reading the first 50 or so pages of this in second person really hits home, and it really gets you hooked in a really unusual way. And it's a fascinating series, the whole series is brilliant, but those first 50 pages really make it stand out, and that's one of the reasons I picked it up. Second person, I think, should be used more often, but not too much because it takes away some of the excitement of it. But I definitely think it's a style that is really interesting, and in this really delivers a fascinating introduction to the book. The last book on the list for today then is the one that was the first really unusual book I read. And actually that's a bit of a lie, because I've read the first 40-50 pages a few times, but it's quite complicated to get into, and I'll explain why now. It's S by J.J. Abrams, the film director, wrote this, him and another author, and it's really weird. So there's numerous things in this which are really interesting. Firstly, all of the pages, let me try and find a page, have got two stories on them. So firstly, they've all got the standard narrative of the story. Secondly, they've got annotations, and there's a whole conversation between two people in the annotations that goes alongside the story in the book, and it's a really interesting kind of dual narrative. It's really strange. They kind of intersect in weird, unusual ways, but it's a really clever way of doing it. The second thing, which you might have noticed then because a few bits slipped out, is that loads of the pages have got these quite unusual little tidbits and things to go with them. So for example, on one of the pages there's a polite newspaper article that ties in with it, and it's really clever. I have made a bit of a boo-boo because I pulled this out of a random page and closed the book, and now I don't know where it goes back. So that could be an interesting experience. But these extra little bits do make a big difference to the book and really make it stand out. It is not the easiest book to read, but it's definitely an enjoyable one, and I think it's one that everyone should at least have a flick through and see just what it's about, because it's so unusual. And in terms of narrative styles, because it's got the combination of the dual narrative and the pull-out bits, it is the most unusual and the most interesting book, narrative-wise, that I've ever seen. So there we have it, my unusual narratives. It's a really interesting mixture of stuff. There's quite a lot of similarities in what kind of things is used in just using non-standard first or third person. But all in all, they create really different effects and have really different impacts on the book themselves. I would definitely suggest you read some of these because they're just interesting. If you like books and you're interested in how they work, they really provide a lot of information on that as well. So definitely advise you give them a read. If you've enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. It's really appreciated. We're at a really good total now. I'm really happy to see that we're getting so many followers, and it's really enjoyable, and I really appreciate it from every single one of you. Also, comment down below if you've got any interesting narrative styles that you want to contribute in, any books that you think I should read. This kind of stuff's really interesting to me, so I'm always after more. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back in the next few days with my next